In this story, the protagonist is treated worse than the scum of the earth. Every single day is a living hell. Hiragi is constantly bullied by the meatheads in his class. They treat him like an errand boy, making him spend his own cash. What sucks most is that even Shizu, the Mr. Perfect of the school, is one of those who loves to pick on Hiragi. Day after day, he has to bust his back working part-time, just to afford snacks for them. It's rough as hell, but if he ever refused, there's no telling what those bastards would do, so he just puts up with their orders. On some unlucky days, they find any excuse to beat him up, like just for being late. Then the ringleader starts throwing hands, while the whole class just laughs their heads off. In the middle of that misery, there is always one person on his side, a girl named Shira. Even though she's the school idol, she's the only one who sticks up for a loser, like him. But because he's worried about her safety, especially since those guys might target her next, he pushes her away and walks off, while those clowns laugh like they just won the lottery. On one fateful day, Hiragi's entire class, himself included, is summoned to a palace and hailed by the royals as heroes who will take down the Demon King. Shizu steps forward and tells them they have absolutely no idea how to use their own powers, for real. So the queen asks her daughter, Chero, to train them. The princess instructs the heroes to check their status windows so they can be trained according to their individual strengths. To explain further, Chero says the status window is a screen that displays their personal abilities in detail, and they just need to say status to view it. Following Shizu's lead, everyone except Hiragi calls up their status window, and they can all see their stats. When Hiragi finally gives in, he summons his own status window. On the screen, he sees that he possesses some totally cracked skills, including the title of Guardian Deity and the one who transcends human limits. He scrolled further and saw 2 more titles: Blessing of the God and Favor of the Supreme God. And he had every type of magic imaginable. This made him break out in a sweat as if he'd just been partying all day. But an even bigger surprise was waiting when he realized that all of his skills were maxed out at level 10. Hiragi was shook by this cheat and thought some hacker had broken into his status window, because even Sung Jinwoo didn't have stats that perfect. First of all, he wondered why he was blessed by the gods, and then felt confused, hoping that everyone else was the same. He asked Shira about her stats, but she started blushing for no reason, as if his magic wand was right under her skirt. Regardless, he looked at her screen and saw that she was just a mage, and that was literally all that was written on her display, which meant he was built different. He sank into thought, wondering if this wasn't a glitch. It meant he had the most cracked cheat in the whole class. Meanwhile, Shira also asked to see his status window, and she just kept scrolling down, seeing more and more skills with a look of pure shock. She smiled warmly and reminded Hiragi that he had always been bullied before, but now he would no longer be a weakling for the bastards in class to trample on. Their conversation was cut short by Chero. She announced she'd be checking everyone's status, screen one by one, so everyone should keep their windows open. The loud-mouthed and arrogant Shizu was so confident in his skills that he told her to start with his screen first. While she was checking Shizu's stats, Hiragi swallowed hard, as he was nervous and didn't know what to expect. Meanwhile, his mind traveled back in time to where it all began. Hiragi. At first, he found himself in a place that could only be called heaven, because it was cleaner and brighter than his own future. But everything actually started about a second before that, when the whole class was engulfed in a strange light, and he suddenly found himself isolated from everyone else. Then a weird old man appeared and called out his name, holding a staff in his hand. He apologized for dragging him here, without any prior warning. Hiragi was terrified, but not as terrified as when he discovered that this creep was actually floating in midair. After noticing that he was losing his cool, he pulled himself together and asked the man who he was. The man rose up in all his radiant glory, declaring himself to be God, the most powerful, and the ruler over all other deities. Hiragi was obviously stunned, so the old man invited him for tea to discuss the reason for summoning him. God went on to inform him of 4 main things. First, the entire class would be transported to another world. Second, Hiragi would be given cheat abilities so he wouldn't die. Third, he needed to defeat the Demon King as a hero. And fourth, he was the last one in class to hear about all this. Then God proceeded to grant him the cheat abilities by waving his staff. But Hiragi didn't feel any different even after that. Before he could say a word, God wished him luck with his new abilities in the new world, and then teleported him to the castle, where he found himself that day. Back in the present, the princess had just finished checking his status window, and her face was so flushed that Hiragi anxiously asked if she was just surprised. However, she said nothing, and he felt relieved because at least he wasn't weak. Suddenly, he wondered why she was being so quiet, and wanted to know what was on her mind. But she said that she wasn't sure if with such power in his hands, he wouldn't betray and attack them instead, so she could have him executed immediately. He couldn't even wrap his head around this crappy luck that always seemed to follow him. He just got a fresh start in another world, and now he might get offed. However, the princess told him she had a proposal for him, and she wouldn't mention anything about his power to her parents. He was surprised by this sudden pivot and asked her if she wasn't afraid of him. But she said that wasn't the case at all, since she possessed a skill called lucidity, which allowed her to see right through people's intentions. Curious, he asked her what his heart looked like, and she told him that, even though there were a few dark spots, his heart was much purer than the rest of them. To be fair, the other heroes had great skills, but Hiragi was the strongest and stood out the most among them. Besides, other than him and a few others, the remaining heroes had very strange colors in their hearts. After hearing this, he finally understood why she reacted so weirdly toward Shizu. She saw right through his perfect guy act and realized he was just a devil in human skin. This encouraged Hiragi to learn how to control his power better. That night, he was given a room that looked absolutely majestic, and it turned out everyone else was given a private room too. This was thanks to the royal family treating all of them very generously. But back to the main point, Hiragi needed to figure out what was up with his stats. He tapped on the title Blessing of the Gods, and it expanded to show him that all his stat growth had been modified, and he could use magic of all elements. He realized these were probably the cheat abilities that God had given him, until he saw another title, named Favor of the Supreme God. Special title. It means that all of its stats have been significantly boosted. Every new skill it acquires will immediately be raised to the highest level, and it only needs 1/10 of the experience required to level up. Holy crap, seeing this, it remembered the kind-hearted, generous God who gave it these cheat abilities, and discovered that it is now invincible. But suddenly, its mind went down a dark path, and it realized that with its cheat abilities, it could take revenge on all those assholes who used to bully it at school. Anyway, the next day, it woke up early and took a walk through the beautiful castle garden right before breakfast. It felt a sensation in its body right at the back, representing its magic core. Then it reached out its hand and created a small fireball, so it was celebrating its small wins. When the princess walked in and asked what the hell it was doing, it asked her what was wrong and why she had that look on her face, and she said it's because it only arrived yesterday, but was already able to use magic. It naively said it was just trying out some random stuff, and happened to succeed by chance. But the princess was totally floored, because even the most elite mages take 3 weeks before they can cast their first spell. Then again, with its stats, that's not entirely surprising. But Hiragi surprised her even more when she saw it double up with water magic on the other side, and realized it didn't even need an incantation. Now all of this was a huge surprise to it too, even while it was playing around with its water magic. But the princess just gave up, stating she couldn't be any more shocked at that point. At first, she planned to train all the heroes, but she decided that she would personally supervise his training. He was grateful for her offer, and she mentioned that even though she might not look like it, she was the youngest person in history to become a royal mage. That was good news, but the even better news was that he'd get to touch those big, juicy curves hidden under her dress. He forced his head back into the game and asked if he could see her status screen. And when she showed it to him, he saw a lot of impressive skills, even though they weren't quite as good as his. She blushed and tried to explain that her stats were actually amazing, even by the standards of a royal mage, so they probably only looked unimpressive, because he himself was just too special. Anyway, he apologized and told her that he would be counting on her help. But at that point, there was no other choice. Later at the royal castle's dining hall, Hiragi was looking for the perfect spot to sit, when Sierra motioned to him and invited him to sit right next to her. Initially, he felt something was off, but she didn't give him a chance to hesitate, grabbing his arm and planting his butt right down beside her. This drew a lot of angry, jealous glares because she was the most popular girl in class, and they were dying to be the one sitting right next to her. But Hiragi didn't care and just wanted to eat. However, one of his shameless bullies questioned the audacity of him sitting right next to Sierra. But Hiragi boldly stood his ground, saying he only sat there because she invited him. Nevertheless, the red-haired guy grabbed his collar and called Hiragi a liar. Then he ordered him to get out of that chair. The whole time Hiraishi was processing the fact that his stats were insane, and he didn't need to be afraid of this prick anymore. So he calmly told him to take his hands off him. This came as a shock to everyone, including Shido and Kondo. So the redhead clenched his fists and gave him a cold stare. By evening, he was determined to knock Hiragi's teeth out. He warned him and told him not to act like a tough guy. But just as he threw a punch, Sierra intervened and stopped Kanzaki from hurting Hiragi. Eventually, he pulled back and walked away, vowing that he'd still get back at Hiragi for what he had done. Sierra checked on Hiragi, and he said he was fine and thanked her. But she said she didn't really do anything. Besides, Hiragi is light years stronger than Kanzaki, yet he didn't use his power against him. That just shows how great of a person he is. A few days later, they officially began their special training. The first week was all about magic theory in class, but Hiragi was the exception. Chero was tutoring him one-on-one in her secret garden. One of the lessons required Hiragi to hit targets with magic, so he conjured fireballs and aimed for all three. He did so well that he even toasted unintended targets. The princess was super impressed, saying he just went a little overboard. No big deal. They continued training that same day, and so Hiragi accidentally soaked Charon with holy water. Consider it a thank you for her teaching him. In return, she invited him to a tea party. This was incredibly awkward, since he didn't understand her motive. But her innocent giggles couldn't stop him from checking out the flower between her legs. That day, Sierra again asked to sit next to him, staying as sweet to him as ever. Kanzaki was clearly jealous, but didn't start any more trouble. Finally, 2 weeks passed in the new world. It's time for Hiragi to group up with his classmates, but the moment he sees those bullies, he wishes he were born a trash can, rather than having to deal with these losers. While he's deep in thought, the princess asks him if he's getting along with the other heroes. He says no, but tells her that Sierra is an ally unlike the rest of them. The moment she hears Sierra's name, the princess gets so jealous that she grabs his arm, pulls him close to her chest, and insists that she is his ally too. Anyway, his classmates continue their training, but Hiragi is starting to get bored, so he joins up with Sierra, which makes Ren even more jealous. 2 weeks later, it's been a full month since they woke up in this world. The teacher claims their abilities are now beyond question. He tells them they must fight monsters and give it their all. Hearing this, everyone is totally hyped up. Today will be their first time testing their skills in a dungeon, and Hiragi is glad they're finally going to level up. Everyone has been stuck at level 1 throughout their training. Afterwards, Sierra asks him if he wants to party up with her. He agrees immediately, since they were instructed to form 2-person teams for the dungeon anyway. It's a perfect match, but right behind them, Kanzaki shows up and tells Sierra that he should be the one protecting her instead of a loser like Hiragi. He says he'll be her protector. However, Sierra tells him that only the biggest idiot on earth would ever want to team up with him. That comment drags his ego through the mud, leaving him completely stunned. She grabs Hiragi's hand and heads straight for the dungeon, but he warns her that if she keeps defending him, they're going to start targeting her too. However, she says that is not the reason. Actually, it's because Kanzaki has confessed his love to her countless times. That guy is seriously the ultimate simp. Right then, they encounter their first monster, a goblin. Hiragi was hyped to zap it with his lightning magic. Safe to say those goblins regretted ever being born, because he took them out in a heartbeat. That night in his room, he checked his status board, hoping he'd at least reached level 2. But he was shook to find out he was already level 37. It made 0 sense. He'd only killed 3 goblins. How could he possibly be level 37 already? This had to be a bonus from his Blessing of the Gods title. It helps calibrate the growth rate of his stats. Rechecking the board, he noticed he'd gained new skills, Bloodlust and Weapon Creation. He tapped on Bloodlust and learned it could petrify opponents, and depending on the stat gap between him and his target, it could even be fatal. Hiragi knew for sure this was dangerous. A normal person might drop dead just because he's too OP. He'd have to restrain himself. The next skill was Weapon Creation, which allowed him to forge any weapon from his limitless imagination. This one was awesome too, but Hiragi feared for his life. If anyone found out about this ability, he'd be in deep trouble. Having great power is good, but being the only one in class with these broken cheat codes was just plain ridiculous. Regardless, Hiragi determined to push deep into the dungeon as far as possible. Day by day passed, and it was now the 5th day of dungeon exploration. After clearing the dungeon that day, Sierra asked Hiragi what his current level was. He said he'd reached level 100. However, she looked at him as if he were some crazy person who just escaped an asylum. So he corrected himself and said he was level 20, same as Sierra. Deep down, he was glad she believed him. He didn't want her knowing his real level, even though he'd gotten used to exploring the dungeon with Shizuka. Anyway, he told her they'd be aiming for the 30th floor. But they had to be careful because from the 21st floor onward, the enemies would be way stronger. They hadn't gone very far before they encountered their first terrifying monsters, a pack of demon wolves, with eyes that looked like they could peer right into their souls. Scenting fresh meat, the wolves began to drool and lunged at them without a moment's hesitation. She panicked, but then Hiragi helped her out of the way and told her to let him handle it. At first, he thought about using fire magic, but realized it would be too dangerous since they were inside a cave. For the safety of them both, he decided to use wind magic instead. He created blasts of wind as powerful as bullets, dropping the wolves on the spot. By the 22nd floor, she was able to handle a few bats on her own using fire magic. They continued their conquest all the way to the 29th floor. That achievement had Sierra feeling stoked. She went up 6 levels while Hiragi went up 100, but he just pretended that he'd gained the same amount. Now that they had conquered the 30th floor, Sierra felt it was time to head home, and Hiragi agreed. They had spent a lot of time conquering the dungeon and made significant progress, advancing to the 50th floor, the deepest part of the dungeon. They opened the floor's gate and were met with blinding light, but Hiragi sensed something moving. While Sierra was still dazed, Hiragi quickly shielded her and pulled her back. Right behind her was a giant white wolf. It was clearly the boss of that floor. It had stealth skills, but that was exactly why they came here. He asked Sierra if she was ready. Immediately, they both attacked the white wolf. Sierra provided cover with her magic, while Hiragi launched a direct physical attack with a kick. Once the white wolf was in position, Hiragi prepared to finish it off with a powerful move. However, Shido and Kanzaki cut in, telling him not to get in the way. They claimed they would be the ones to defeat this monster. He told them to go right ahead. But just as they got close to the wolf, it punched them so hard their souls practically left their bodies. They were knocked out cold on the spot. Hiragi thought they looked absolutely pathetic. He couldn't believe these were the same people who used to bully him. Regardless, the battle with the white wolf raged on. It lunged straight at him. Sierra told him to hold back and let her handle the wolf. She conjured a crown of magic arrows right above its head, then let them all rain down and pierce its hide, creating the perfect opening for Hiragi to land the finishing blow. As soon as the white wolf was defeated, it vanished into thin air, leaving a treasure chest behind. They figured it contained the rewards for the battle they just won. When they opened the chest, they found the wolf's fangs. Now that they had their loot, it was time to return to the surface. But Hiragi noticed those 2 idiots still lying unconscious on the floor. He thought it'd be a bit cruel to just ditch them, so Hiragi carried both of them on his shoulders. Sierra was super impressed, but in reality, Hiragi used a cheat to make them feel light as a feather. When they reported back to their teacher, he asked what happened to Kanzaki and Shido. Hiragi said they were taken out by the 50th floor boss, but that he had successfully defeated it. The teacher was incredibly impressed and shocked. That monster was so powerful that even 5 C-rank adventurers couldn't take it down. But Hiragi didn't really care. It was an easy win for him. He showed him the reward they got from the treasure chest. The teacher's jaw dropped in amazement when he realized it was a rare white wolf fang. Hiragi didn't know what to do with it. So the teacher said he could use it however he liked. If he used it as a material, he could craft an incredible sword. Hiragi took the advice and agreed to make a sword. But Sierra politely declined when he asked if she wanted one too, because the only sword she needed was his long and juicy katana. He asked him if there was anything else he could make for her. He suggested he could make a pendant. This time Sierra agreed to have a pendant made. Later, when Hiragi got home, the princess ran out to greet him and invited him to lunch. There, he reported the results of his dungeon exploration. She was quite surprised and impressed that he managed to defeat the white wolf. But when he mentioned it was all thanks to Sierra's help, her jealousy mode was quickly triggered. She asked him if he liked her cake. He showered her with compliments, saying it was top tier. So good that he wanted to motorboat it right then and there. His praise made her blush like crazy. She said she made it all by herself, and since he liked it, she'd make even more for him to eat. A few days later, Hiragi finally had his first day off and was super hyped to relax. He wondered if he should just stay home and chill, since he didn't really have any plans. But then he got dressed up anyway and decided to head out. Right outside the door, he ran into the princess. She had definitely been standing there waiting for him to show up. She asked what his plans for the day were. He said he was planning to take a stroll around town, so she offered to show him around. Later, as they entered the town, Hiragi complimented her, saying she looked even prettier than usual, but she got all flustered and pouty. So he teased her, saying, "It's not like you're ever ugly." Everything should have been smooth sailing, but her face just kept getting redder because he was making her all wet down there. Feeling curious, he asked if it was okay for her to leave the palace without any bodyguards. She said it was no big deal. She'd snuck out several times before. He just stared at her, knowing she secretly went to meet her dad's old friends, otherwise known as sugar daddies. She knew exactly what he was thinking. She argued, "I'm not being sneaky. I asked for permission properly before leaving." Her answer caught Hiragi off guard. He thought she'd read his mind for a second. He said, "Wow, it's like we're on the same wavelength." Those words only made her blush even more, so she quickly changed the subject. She insisted on taking him to the Grand Cathedral. Once they arrived, he was floored by how massive it was. She said it was the largest cathedral in the country, because here anyone can summon a god or a demon, but only once in their lifetime. Hiragi asked if she had ever summoned one before. She said not exactly. That's why she wanted to give it a shot today. A priest appeared and said the summoning ritual costs 5 copper coins per person, so they paid for the 2 of them. He gave them the green light to start since no one else was around, and even offered to explain the ritual if they needed it. The princess politely declined, saying she could handle it all herself. She gave Hiragi an order, telling him to pour mana into the magic circle. The more mana you use, the higher the chance of summoning a high-level demon or god. She volunteered to go first. Channeling mana into the circle, she began to mutter an incantation. Then a puff of smoke rose up, and a cute little kitten appeared. She named it Misa, but Hiragi was surprised that she only summoned a cat. She explained that this was actually a spirit. In the spirit hierarchy, the highest is God tier, followed by Emperor tier, Super tier, High tier, and finally Low tier, the lowest in the system. She sweetly stated that her kitten was a high-tier spirit. It was Hiragi's turn. He poured his mana into the magic circle and recited the exact same words the princess had used. But instead of a kitten, a smoking hot angel appeared. She called him master and asked him to give her a name. This request drove him wild. He's totally into that master-servant kink, but he told her not to call him master, then told her his real name. She preferred to call him Lord or Great Master. The princess was standing there in absolute shock. Hiragi named the girl Coco. She said she loved the name because he could whisper Coco to her anytime you want. He asked if she was also a spirit. She confirmed she was, and a god-tier spirit at that. The absolute highest rank among spirits. The princess got more shell-shocked with every new revelation. He had to go check on her to see if she was okay. She whispered into his ear, "There's only one god-tier spirit in this entire world, and she just happens to be yours." But Hiragi didn't think it was that big of a deal. Sherelle was so shook that she failed to realize the gravity of the situation. As for him, he was just glad to have a powerful ally now. Realizing that helped her calm down a bit. On the way back, he asked her if the king would be cool with them bringing someone extra home. She said it wouldn't be a problem. Those other heroes probably summoned their own spirits by now, too. It seemed like this was news to him. But the princess told him not to be surprised. He was still the only one who summoned a god-tier spirit, but whatever. He noticed they were getting too much attention because of her wings. She was way too conspicuous, so he told her to hide them. She just made them completely invisible. He also suddenly remembered he didn't have a place for Coco to stay, but she said she didn't mind sleeping in the same room as him. The princess, jealous and fearing for her own territory in his bedroom, immediately shut that down. Because a guy and a girl sharing a room is just scandalous. He argued it was just for one night, but she pointed out there were plenty of empty rooms available. Deep down she was thinking how unfair it was that Coco got to share a bed with him, while she had to sleep all alone. Hiragi flopped onto his bed, happy after a fun outing with the princess. That was actually his first time hanging out with a girl. Sherelle pushed Coco toward her room, wished him good night, and he had fallen for her at first sight. But just then he remembered those two bastards. He realized that his fear of them had completely vanished. I will achieve my goal of getting my revenge in this world. I'll definitely make them suffer even more. That reminds me of my status board. I haven't checked it in a long time, but when it opens up, huge surprise is waiting for me. I'm at level 588. My skills have skyrocketed. I've gained a new title, Hatred. Embraced by revenge the moment I touch it. I know that skill can be activated upon reaching a certain level of animosity toward an opponent, and it will boost my current stats tenfold. It allows me to acquire the strength and skills of my enemy, and its effect on the opponent is to inflict excruciating pain upon them. This is good news, though I realize I must be careful not to accidentally unleash that lethal ability on those weak-ass bullies over there. The next day, Sierra was practicing her magical abilities, especially fire magic. She tried to incinerate a few targets. She was proud of herself for reaching level 50, not knowing she was talking to a real-life Go-8 whose level was over 10 times higher. That day was a self-study day, because their instructor was out looking for some homies, so they took the initiative to hone their skills. Unfortunately, no one else showed up for practice. Since both the princess and instructor Gavis were absent, everyone just treated it as a day off. Zero was low-key happy about it, as it gave them a chance to be alone together and flex as much as they wanted. But she noticed her mind was racing and tried to brush those thoughts away. It was Hiragi's turn to sharpen and test his magic skills. He hurled a few flames at the targets and burned them to a crisp again. That was his way of holding back. But of course, his power was far too massive to look like an average Joe. Sierra was surprised and impressed because back in the dungeon, I've always relied on martial arts to take down monsters, so she had no idea I had become this cracked at magic. Besides, she also noticed that I had changed and gained more confidence over time. I told her that in my past life I was bullied by my classmates, but now that fear has completely vanished. This prompted her to ask if I hated those guys. I confessed that I hate them to my very core, so much that I want to rip their heads off. I felt that Sierra might hate me for confessing this bitter truth. I added that I'm no hero and the power I've obtained will be used for my own selfish goals, because that's just who I am, however. Sira pulled me out of that negative spiral. She told me that wasn't true. I looked up and saw that she was crying. I was shocked and confused. She explained that I wasn't that kind of person, because even in that moment, I still cared about her. For that reason, she felt that I was a wonderful person. I thanked her, as it was the first time anyone had ever said such kind things to me. Then I handed her a handkerchief to wipe away her tears. That simple gesture reinforced her opinion of me that I was a truly kind person. But Hiragi felt the truly kind one between the two of them was Sira. 3 days had passed since the self-study day. The princess invited me to her tea party once she returned to the castle. While I was licking her ice cream and mentioning it tasted like strawberry, I realized how relaxed I felt doing so. She matched my energy, saying talking to me was fun, but suddenly, their chill afternoon was interrupted by a loud cry for help, which made them both jump and try to figure out what was going on. Using his presence detection skill, Hiragi sensed monsters inside the castle, lots of them. Obviously, they couldn't keep having their tea party and had to rush off immediately to save the day. Hiragi told Chirio to stay back, but she insisted on following him, since she is the princess of the kingdom. He agreed and told her not to worry. If things get dicey, he'll protect her. Then they headed out of the palace. Blood was splattered everywhere. The casualties were massive. Monsters were swatting humans away like flies. Just as one guy was about to meet his maker, the princess quickly intercepted and attacked, right in front of him, using her magical power. Meanwhile, Hiragi stood back and roasted those bloodsuckers. Shereller got a bit more adventurous with her magic, showing off just for the fun of it, creating a golem so hard it ended up shattering into pieces. The battle raged on until sunset, and they completely wiped out the monsters. Hiragi confirmed it with his detection skill. It was a relief that everything was finally over, but there were still tragic casualties, and Hiragi blamed himself for not noticing sooner. The princess told him not to beat himself up, but he couldn't help it, and sincerely apologized for not being able to save the knights. At that moment, those heroes showed up, claiming they were there to help, just like Hollywood cops, always arriving after the chaos is already over. However, they saw there were no monsters left, only dead or injured knights. Kazaki opened his trash mouth and called himself a great hero, only to find the party was already over. That idiot Zetu said they were just wasting their time, and they might as well just head back. Hiragi couldn't believe their lack of empathy, even after seeing so many dead people. He snapped at them, telling them they should at least move their lazy asses and help the wounded. But those selfish bastards didn't budge, and their leader said their armor was too heavy to carry anyone. Besides, he said that's a job for scum like Hiragi. Zero stepped up to help, and he told her to help tend to the wounded, instead of carrying them. He gave the same order to Chirio. Meanwhile, Kaneki and his squad of idiots were about to bounce, but Hiragi blocked them and asked if they were freaking kidding. They wouldn't help the injured, yet they had the audacity to call themselves heroes. Setu told him to stop yapping. The emergency they were called for had nothing to do with the Demon King, which meant it wasn't their job. He asked that clown if they thought they could save the world without saving people. They seemed to think beating the Demon King was all that was expected of them. That attitude made Setu blow a fuse. Furious, he drew his sword to slash the hell out of Hiragi. But before he could even swing it, Hiragi's knife was already at his throat. Hiragi warned him to recognize the massive skill gap between the two of them. Setu went dead silent, looking like a total loser. Luckily, the queen intervened just in time. She asked what was going on. Both of them were startled. Setu smirked and ditched his sword. He immediately cried for help, begging the queen to save him because Hiragi suddenly attacked him. This bastard was the root of all the drama. His lies and betrayal were truly nauseating to see. To make it worse, the current situation made Hiragi look like the actual villain. Hiragi was livid, wanting to end Sidhu right then and there. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sidhu immediately played the victim, claiming he was innocent since he hadn't done a thing. But Sidhu called Hiragi a liar, and even demanded the other heroes back up his accusations. Without a second thought, those brainless fools agreed instantly, claiming Hiragi was a liar and a traitor. He was absolutely done with them. They showed up after the monsters were already wiped out, and still didn't do jack squat. But Setu was more diabolical than the devil himself. He flipped the script and claimed Hiragi was the one who arrived late, while they were the ones who actually saved everyone. The queen was disappointed hearing these accusations. She called her daughter over to hear her side of the story. But before she could even answer, Sidhu started lying through his teeth again, claiming Hiragi had coerced her onto the battlefield and intentionally put her in danger. The queen was furious upon hearing this and asked her daughter if it was true. However, Chirio stated that she was the one who chose to follow Hiragi, even though he was worried about her safety. After thinking for a moment, the queen asked Hiragi to answer honestly about the matter, then asked him if he had handled everything all by himself. he confessed that it wasn't exactly as she thought, since he received help from both Cheerio and the knights. The queen asked the knight captain to verify his words, and the man told her straight up that while they were struggling against the monsters, Hiragi and the princess rushed in to help them. The queen reflected for a bit and said she understood. She then bowed politely to Hiragi, thanking him for protecting them from the monsters. She said she wanted to show her deep gratitude by granting his innermost desires. But Hiragi politely declined her generous offer. Having witnessed it all, Setu lost it and screamed at the queen, asking if she really believed Hiragi over him. But the queen said that after considering everything that happened, she didn't think Hiragi was at fault. She also wished him luck, dealing with his inner demons, along with the rest of his group, as she no longer cared. Right then, Sira told Hiragi that they had finished treating the wounded, so he let them both head out. Meanwhile, Kaneki, annoyed, said they should just go back, because looking at Hera and Sira was making him sick. Setu agreed to leave, but he was clearly seething, giving a look full of pure hatred, as if he was ready to get his get back. Hiragi returned the stare. But right then something strange happened to him, and both girls were confused by the look on his face. He asked Sira if she was okay with doing everything and risking being shunned by everyone. But she smiled and said it was honestly fine, because she has her childhood friend by her side. Later on, they said their goodbyes, and before they knew it, night had fallen. Then as Hiragi was walking, Koko called out to him, and he turned around to see her in a full maid outfit. He asked her what she was doing, and she said she was practicing to serve him, hoping that one day he would pick her up and lift that maid outfit up. She also said she loved being a maid, and Hiragi had no complaints about it. So he encouraged her to just have fun, but told her to call him if anything came up that needed his immediate attention. She was very grateful for his thoughtfulness, but said she didn't want to be a bother. But then this guy suddenly started talking like a real Andrew Tate, saying he wanted to be her top G. This immediately made her melt, and she found herself blushing hard, even though Hiragi found it adorable. At that moment, the other maids in the palace called her over to lend a hand. She bowed to her master before heading off. On the way home, Hiragi wondered why monsters suddenly appeared in the castle gardens, since there were no signs of them coming from the outside. The only possible explanation for this was that someone had summoned a massive number of monsters into the castle. He was lost in thought for a while, but snapped himself out of it, realizing that just thinking about it wouldn't solve the problem, and that he should share his thoughts with the princess the next time they met. The next day, Hiragi's classmates kept ghosting and avoiding him like he had the plague. But he was already used to this kind of mistreatment since his miserable school days. He was glad that at least Hiro didn't join them in acting like he didn't exist, even though she was trying to keep him at a distance so the angry girls around her wouldn't bite his head off. Still, he took this as a good sign, as it meant he could now go solo, exploring the dungeons, which was all he ever wanted. While everyone else kept being salty, Sira wasn't exactly pleased because she wondered if he would go dungeon crawling without her, now that they were allowed to explore as individuals. She also wished all this drama hadn't happened, because by now she'd already be carrying his kids. Talk about being down bad. She wanted to see Hiragi so much that she didn't even hear her best friend, Ice, calling her until she screamed at the top of her lungs. Immediately, Ice could tell that Sira's mind was somewhere else, but Sira played it down, saying absolutely nothing was wrong and that she was totally fine. However, it only took Ice a split second to read between the lines, realizing she was probably thinking about Hiragi. She asked if Sira actually liked Hiragi, but the girl in love couldn't bring herself to admit it, even though she turned beet red at the mention of his name. Ice kept teasing her, until she couldn't take it anymore, and she finally stopped. But they were suddenly startled when they heard another woman screaming because of a hideous giant toad that wanted to shove its long tongue, well, you know, into a place it shouldn't go. They were totally grossed out and all wanted to steer clear of it. But Sira didn't even hesitate, and went straight after the toad, ignoring all the warnings that it was extremely dangerous. She hit back with a long-winded, boring lecture about how fighting under pressure is the only way they'll ever get stronger. Then she stopped just a few feet from the toad, admiring its fat belly while summoning a massive amount of wind magic around them, and after that she ordered it to shape into a blade to slice right through the monster. In the blink of an eye, it was over, and the toad gradually vanished, leaving all the women watching in total shock. They were seriously impressed and proud of her, thanking her for coming to their rescue. Ice was just as impressed, admitting she had no idea just how powerful Sira had become this whole time. But Sira told her friend that all it takes is a bit of practice, and even Ice could get stronger. This encouraged the other girls, so they all said they wanted to train too. They swarmed around, Sira asking if she could teach them magic, and she agreed. Meanwhile, Hiragi was in his own world, exploring a dungeon, way more dangerous than the one those weak, crybaby girls were scared of. He had just defeated a few monsters and was starting to feel pretty bored since Sira wasn't there with him to give him some action in the dungeon at that moment. A small pet dog claiming to be a monster walked in with a message scroll in a bottle clamped between its jaws. And just as Hiragi's curiosity was piqued, the dog approached slowly, trying to be careful around a calm Hiragi. Hiragi squatted down to eye level with it and promised not to do any harm, assuring the dog that he wasn't an enemy. Finally, the dog came close enough for Hiragi to pet its head, and when he asked for the bottle in its mouth, the dog obediently dropped it into his hand. Hiragi stared at it and noticed there was something inside, so he popped it open and unfurled the contents, only to find out it was a letter. Inside was a message from someone saying they were trapped on the 100th floor of the dungeon and couldn't move, so they were asking him for help. He leaned down and asked the dog if it knew where he could find the sender, and received a positive response, meaning it would lead the way immediately. The dog shot off like a rocket at insane speeds, making Hiragi question his own pace. They ran into a few trash goblins along the way, but the dog wiped them out, using its magical abilities. Seeing the way it handled itself, Hiragi knew it was best to never mess with that dog. Soon the dog signaled they'd arrived, and Hiragi looked up to see they really were on the 100th floor. He looked around and saw that the entire place had been turned to rubble, and his so-called princess in distress was nowhere to be seen. However, the dog started barking at a specific spot, and Hiragi wondered if the person who wrote the letter could be behind those massive doors. He reached out and used a magic orb he'd created to blast through the debris, clearing a direct path to the giant gates. The dog kept urging him on. He applied pressure to the gates and forced them open. Then he found a blue-haired girl, trapped in magical chains. He walked over to her to check things out, to check if she was doing okay, as she seemed to have passed out or fallen asleep. But the moment he touched one of the chains, a powerful surge of electricity shot through his hands, and he instantly yanked them back. He got curious about the chains and knew that if he wanted to help her, he'd eventually have to do something about them. He used his skill, called ability appraisal, and discovered that the chain was a seal that would bind the first person who touched it. To break the seal, a certain amount of mana was required, and since Hiragi had a ton of it, this wasn't even a debate for him. So, he immediately grabbed the chain and began pouring his mana into it. However, he had to pay a price, and his hands took the collateral damage. As he funneled his magic in, massive amounts of energy kept surging through him, causing him excruciating pain and nearly driving him crazy. Finally, the chain shattered, and she fell into his arms in slow motion. But despite being unconscious, her thirsty instincts took control, and she dove straight for his sweet spot. A few seconds later, she came to, and when he asked if she was okay, she totally lost her cool. She started trembling, but soon realized that he had actually rescued her. So she jumped on him and thanked him for saving her life. Hiragi was down bad for her beauty. Then she introduced herself as Yui and asked for his name. While he was still in a daze, she held his hand. So he introduced himself as Hiragi, but his name sounded completely weird to her. So he had to reveal that he was from another world. Hearing that he came from another world, she immediately asked, "Do you mean you were summoned as a hero?" But Hiragi said that didn't matter as much as finding out why she was chained up. She was just about to answer when her puppy rushed over and started licking her, like crazy, doing all the things Hiragi could only dream of. He asked if the puppy belonged to her. She said it's like family and its name is Pick. Next, Hiragi asked about the letter he was holding. She explained she wrote it using a clone, right after she was sealed away. That brought him back to his first question. Why was she even sealed in the first place? But she started playing coy with him. In the end, she confessed the chain auto-triggered when she tripped. She face-planted right after that confession. She just wished a giant hole would open up and swallow her whole. She was dying of embarrassment, but Hiragi had to ask if someone had sealed her or something, and she sheepishly said yeah. Looking at her expression and that klutzy behavior, he wondered if this was really what he should expect from the locals in this other world. Anyway, back at the royal castle, it was lunchtime for everyone, and Yui was treated to a delicious feast. She polished off every single bite. She was mesmerized by the flavor and thanked the palace for giving her the best meal of her life. It seemed she was invited to the palace by Charon and would be staying there for quite a while. In return, Yui would have to cooperate with the hero party to defeat the Demon King. While she and Hiragi were chatting away, the other two girls were seething with jealousy, wondering if she had come to steal their man. They kept talking and were only inches away from locking lips. That's when the princess's inner demon was unleashed, and she jumped into their conversation. She asked Hiragi what was wrong with his hand, and he said it was from the dungeon raid the other day. So she started acting all extra, saying he should have told her so she could have healed it for him. She took his hand and began casting a healing spell on his palm. Since the wound was so easy to fix, her healing light instantly enveloped his injured palm and slowly wiped away the wound until nothing remained. Then he thanked her, saying it was the first time he had ever received healing magic, and the princess's magic felt so good that if he ever got hurt again, he would definitely ask for her help. This time, it was everyone else's turn to be jealous of Shirelle. Afterward, Shira pointed out that since Hiragi had reached the 100th floor and even rescued Yui, his adventurer rank was now S-Class, or even higher. Confirmed this and sincerely admitted she was a bit jelly, even though she was only a few levels away from S rank herself. Hiragi cheered her up, saying she was almost there and that one day she would definitely make it. She asked if he could go with her to the 100th floor, and he said for sure. She'd be fine as long as he was by her side, and besides, exploring with her would be a blast. Now it was the other girl's turn to be jealous of Shira. Hiragi mentioned he heard about a training session that Yui was going to participate in, so she invited him back to the 100th floor again, since he was headed that way anyway. When they locked in the decision, it seemed Yui had gained the upper hand over the other three girls, and the envy was written all over the faces of Shirelle and Shira. Later, Yui and Hiragi returned to the 100th floor, and she mowed down monsters like they were nothing. Hiragi was super impressed with her magic. She also appreciated him and mentioned that she had dedicated her whole life to magic, and she even called out her pet using summoning magic. Hiragi asked her to teach him how to use summoning magic too. She said no problem at all. But before that, he needed to learn how to control his magic. First, because his power was causing too much collateral damage and destruction for no good reason. However, she kindly offered to show him how to rein in his magic power, and their little chat ended there. Back to game mode. Both of them wondered why the floor boss still hadn't shown up, even though they had traveled such a long distance. But Yui was certain they'd get there soon. Hiragi was curious about the floor boss and asked her what kind of monster it was. But Yui just told him to fuck around and find out. Eventually, they reached another gate, which likely led them to the boss. And not knowing what awaited them, they pushed the gate open. As it swung wide, they saw nothing but pillars inside. But finally, they ventured deeper into the floor, and were nearly blinded by a brilliant light as they entered. Suddenly, a mid-tier dragon appeared from right above them. Hiragi felt a rush of excitement, since he had never seen a real dragon before. Yui warned him not to let his guard down, even though it was just a low-level dragon, so he drew his sword, built up enough momentum to launch himself toward it, and swung his blade at the dragon's hide. Unfortunately, the dragon didn't take a scratch, and he almost lost his balance. So he asked Yui what the hell just happened, and why was the dragon's body hard as a rock. She explained that it's due to the naturally tough quality of dragon scales, and he'd need a proper weapon to pierce through them. That wasn't what Hiragi wanted to hear at all, since he only had one sword in hand. But an idea suddenly flashed in his mind, and he asked Yui to please buy him some time. She asked if he had a plan, and he said he did. He needed about 2 to 3 minutes if she could hold out. But she just smiled at him, and told him not to underestimate her. She continued her magic attacks against the dragon. In the meantime, Hiragi took the opportunity to find a quiet spot and meditate. He was determined to create a weapon, straight from his imagination. Since he didn't have any weapons, he gradually began the process of forging a weapon, using a skill called weapon creation, and soon acquired a powerful divine sword named Hemet. On the flip side, he did a great job holding off the dragon, but she took a few hits in the process. Luckily, Hiragi showed up just in time. She asked if he was done, and he confirmed that he was finished. He thanked her for waiting, and then teamed up with her to finish off the dragon. Things got real serious as Yui unleashed some intense fire attacks, eventually engulfing the dragon completely in flames. And then, Hiragi stepped in just as the dragon tried to bail. However, after he called it out, the dragon spotted Hiragi and lunged straight at him. With his divine sword in hand, he slashed the dragon's neck. Surprisingly, just one single hit was all he needed to take the dragon down. As it slowly faded away, Yui was so hyped that she jumped on his back and rode him. Just kidding, that riding part was a joke, but it was definitely suggestive. At the same time, a treasure chest appeared, and everyone was curious and eager to find out what was inside. Weirdly enough, it was just a piece of meat, wyvern meat, and only Yui was actually excited about it. Hiragi felt like the meat wasn't exactly safe to eat, but she told him that those treasure chests usually come with preservatives, so the meat was good to go. Hiragi agreed to take it. So he opened his magic item box and pulled out some furniture. They then set everything up to eat and grill the meat. All this time, the god had been watching Hiragi and his lively, energetic vibes. But a lower-ranking deity asked him why in the first place he had granted Hiragi, out of all humans, some of their power and God's divine grace. God replied by asking the lower-ranking deity if he had ever witnessed the life of Hiragi before, and the other replied that he had. So he asked what he thought about it in general. The lower-ranking deity said that he felt the young man was living a wretched and pathetic life, since he had reached the point of giving up on life. However, the lower deity also pointed out that there are tons of miserable people, just like him in the world, yet God still chose him out of all of them. God said that was why he took an interest in Hiragi, and because he also wanted to repay him for something he had done back then. By now, the lower deity felt confused, since he had no idea what Hiragi had done. But the supreme god suddenly sounded like Santa Claus having a stroke, saying there's more to it than meets the eye. Back on Earth, Yui and Hiragi were returning from the dungeons, and Yui seemed really hyped over their success in clearing the 100th floor and defeating the Wyvern. As they approached the castle, Shira and the princess were waiting outside to welcome them back from their expedition. Yui asked Shira if she had been waiting for them all this time, but she suddenly started stuttering because clearly she was waiting for Hiragi. Meanwhile, Shirel asked him if he was hurt, but he told her he was fine. However, Yui was curious as to why Shirel was with Shira, even though she said they just ran into each other. Anyway, Shirel said she couldn't handle the anxiety, and Hiragi thanked her for worrying about him. But their cutesy moment became really annoying to the other girls. So Yui cut in by asking when Hiragi would be ready to practice controlling his magic, and Shirel wasn't about to let her have him all to herself. So she asked to join in and support him as well. He happily accepted her offer. But Yui wasn't exactly thrilled, and told him he didn't need 2 teachers to tutor him on magic control. He felt it'd be better to learn from both girls, but Yui was dead set against it. While both girls were crowding around Hiragi, and he was enjoying their company, Shira was left totally out of the loop, so she cut in, saying she wanted to learn magic from Hiragi, while the ladies were busy teaching him how to control his own powers. But at the same time, both ladies shot down her suggestion and offered to teach her magic themselves, if that's what she wanted. While the 3 ladies were going back and forth with their petty drama, Hiragi felt super confused, wondering when they had become besties overnight. Meanwhile, God was watching them and asked the god of creation what he thought of things so far, since with a new world and just a bit of power, Hiragi's life had completely flipped, showing just how interesting humans can be in general. The god of creation smiled and said he was also taking an interest in Hiragi. So he asked the supreme god for permission to let Hiragi have one more ability. God was curious about his plan, so he asked about it, and the god of creation shared that it was all thanks to his power that Hiragi could create the divine sword Hemet. So to level up Hiragi's creative potential, he wanted to grant him the power of absolute creation, allowing Hiragi to create not just weapons, but also skills and magical powers. God thought about it and gave the green light, since he was pretty confident that Hiragi wouldn't use this new ability for anything bad. Immediately, the god of creation granted Hiragi the new ability, and a gentle light washed over his body. While the dog started barking loudly, Hiragi was confused about what just happened, and his reaction alarmed the ladies, who were immediately worried about him. That's all. They all crowded around him, showing how much they cared. He was a bit startled at first, but soon smiled and reassured them that nothing was wrong. Yui, feeling tired, quickly told everyone to head inside for some tea. So the whole squad filed in, but Hiragi was still racking his brain, wondering what kind of thing had just entered his hand. And as the girls called out to him, with their bright smiles and pretty faces, he realized he was definitely a Sigma, the luckiest guy on the planet. But life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, because from the very start, Hiragi was unlucky enough to be born into a family where his parents wished they'd never had him. They were basically thugs and lowlifes, addicted to everything, and never gave a damn about their kids. Hiragi realized with bitterness that his parents never loved him. He was just a walking ATM to them, only useful when he could print money for those useless scumbags. Things weren't much better at school either. His life was unimaginably miserable. Currently, Hiragi had just woken up from a short nap, during which he dreamed of his painful past. Shirel gently shook him awake and tenderly wiped away his tears. She asked if he was okay. That was when Hiragi realized he'd been sobbing. Shirel guessed he must have had a terrible nightmare. He said he'd dreamed of that shitty past again. Shirel encouraged him to share whenever he has nightmares. Even if she couldn't help much, she could at least promise that she would always be there for him. She even said her only selfish wish was to see him smile again. Hiragi smiled gently and thanked Shirel for always staying by his side. That day, they went for a stroll through town together. Hiragi complimented Shirel on her outfit, saying she looked pretty and that it really suited her. Naturally, she blushed beet red. Along the way, they ran into Shira and Yui, but Shirel just wished those 2 girls would get lost and leave them alone, but then stuck with her precious 2-inch ex-boyfriend. The girls apologized for being late. Shirel asked Hiragi where they were heading today. He said he had a place he wanted to stop by. That place was none other than the Adventurers Guild. Since he also wanted to get an adventurer card, Shira said she wanted one too. So that made two of them. Before leaving, he asked if they needed to take some kind of test to qualify for the card. The girls told him he just needed to write his info on a piece of paper. But he said he didn't know how to write in the language of this world. Shira didn't either. So Yui and Shirel volunteered to help them out. They finally reached the Adventurers Guild and were warmly greeted by the receptionist. She handed them some forms to fill out. Right away, they turned to Yui and Shirel for help. The lovely ladies took the forms and helped them fill everything in. They handed the forms to the receptionist, and after a short wait, she announced that their cards were ready. So they grabbed their cards and headed out. The girls asked where they should go next. Hiragi asked Shira if she had ever been to the church. It seemed like she had never been there before, and didn't even know why people went there. Yui also mentioned she had never visited the place. Just as the princess had explained to him, he told them they could perform a summoning ritual there once in their lifetime. Shira was curious how he knew about that, and asked if he had already done it himself. He told her that he and Shirel had gone there alone already. She felt betrayed and totally jelly. Shirel immediately apologized to her, but she had that look on her face that said it was a total non-apology. Later they arrived at the massive cathedral again and were greeted by the priest, who had an attitude more condescending than anyone else. He recognized Hiragi and said the summoning ritual could only be done once, but Hiragi told him he wasn't the one doing it this time, but rather Yui and Shira, so he let them in. Shira went first and stepped into the magic circle, muttering the words that everyone recites, while everyone waited with bated breath to see what she would summon. She leaned down and picked up a cute little puppy. The princess explained it was a lesser spirit. They told her to give it a name, and so she named her dog Sora. A few seconds later, a thick mist enveloped the room, and another spirit appeared, in the center of the magic circle. It was an Emperor-class spirit once again. He was only one rank below Hiragi's. The girls were incredibly impressed, since there are only 4 such spirits in the entire world. Hiragi was 2, but as soon as he opened his mouth, the spirit asked him if he had made a contract with a certain someone. He guessed the person the spirit meant was Coco, and he confirmed that he had indeed contracted with Coco. This made the spirit delighted, because she felt that Coco would be there. However, Hiragi told her that Coco wasn't here right now, but was working as a maid in the royal palace. This whole thing was super bizarre to Yui. She was salty and confused, not understanding why Hiragi was chatting with her spirit. But the spirit explained that it was because he had contracted with a spirit even higher ranked than herself. This left Yui shook, as she realized that Hiragi's spirit was a god-class spirit, who was currently working as a budget maid in the palace. Anyway, he asked her what name she'd give to her spirit, and so she named the spirit Lulu. The spirit was pleased with her name, and swore to serve Yui, faithfully calling Yui her master. Meanwhile, Setsu was having a deep moment, something he usually never had in his miserable life. He realized that things hadn't gone his way for quite some time. I feel like the only one responsible for this is Hiragi, and that dude keeps flexing even though Zero gives him all the attention. And he even gets to hang out with other girls too. That clueless idiot. He feels that all that spotlight should have been his, yet Hiragi seems to be getting everything he wants, so effortlessly. So, he is determined to never lose to a guy like that, someone who was a total loser from the jump. That's just his take on it. In his own words, and he plans to exploit the fact that Hiragi isn't there right now. Meanwhile, the princess is hosting another afternoon tea. Hiragi joins her at the tea table, noticing a significant difference in the taste of her tea. She's stoked that he noticed, since she put a lot of work into it, and swapped out some of the herbs. So he tells her he digs this version more, and it seems they are totally on the same wavelength. This makes the princess shy and red as a beet, but their cute little moment is cut short by none other than that total clown over there. He demands to know why Hiragi is having tea with the princess. So Hiragi tells him this is a scheduled date that was planned in advance, but Shido insists the princess promised to have a tea date with him instead. However, when Hiragi asks her to confirm, Sharon says that's not true at all, because earlier Shido had just promised himself and stormed off alone like he was delusional. This is exactly how it went down. Setsu approached Sharon and asked her for tea, but she politely turned him down, because she already had other plans. He got triggered and asked if those plans were with Hiragi. She already had plans, but he said it was no big deal. He said she could easily cancel on the other guy. The princess was just trying to process what this idiot was actually advising her to do. And before she could even say no, he told her he'd pick her up after training the next day. After hearing the princess's story, Hiragi told Shido that only little kids still losing their baby teeth would ask a girl out in such a pathetic way. but Shido clapped back saying it was obvious. The princess would prefer him over Hiragi. Then Sharon warned him to stop talking like his brain was rotted, because Hiragi is 1,000,000 times better than Shido, so she'd choose him every single time. That left him completely humiliated. He started screaming in her face, telling her not to get all high and mighty. She was just a princess, and she should even be thanking the heavens that he was even blessing her with his attention, as if she'd suffocate from a lack of oxygen if he stopped talking to her. Hiragi was fed up with his garbage mouth. He was about to give him a physical lesson, and it was pretty certain that he'd try his best not to send Shido to the afterlife slowly. As he geared up for action, Sharon could tell that something dangerous was about to go down. At the same time, his rage met the conditions to trigger a skill called hatred, fueled by vengeance. Hiragi had slipped into a dark state. Why did he feel like Setsu didn't even deserve to be alive? But he had to thank his lucky stars when the princess suddenly hugged him and begged him to hold back. He pleaded with her to let him go, but she refused and stood there wrapping her arms round his arm, doing her best to stop the impending tragedy. Once again, she pleaded with him to stop. Her innocent eyes instantly melted his anger away, so he apologized to her and hugged her back. While the two of them were being lovey-dovey right in front of him, Setsu was overcome with rage and slowly drew a sword from his magic toolbox. Then he tried to attack them. However, Hiragi blocked the sword with one hand while still holding Sharon. He simply shoved the guy until he tumbled back and passed out in just a matter of seconds. But Hiragi realized that this idiot didn't deserve the title of hero since he was prone to abusing his power against others for selfish reasons. Sharon immediately agreed with him, so Hiragi suggested he use his creation ability to strip away everything from this loser except for his original skills. He immediately activated Plunder on Setsu, and that was that. Now all they had to do was leave him there until he woke up. Then Sharon thanked him for everything he did that day. But he said he was the one who owed her, since she stopped him from doing something he'd regret. And then they went back to their tea like two lovebirds. When Shido finds out he's been stripped of his power, will World War III break out? In the palace,